All right. Well, good morning and good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants event. My name is Joe Grabowski, and I'll be your host for today. If this is your first time joining us, we are all about bringing science, adventure, exploration, and conservation live into classrooms across North America and beyond. If you head to exploringbytheseat.com, you will see that on any given month, we're hosting 40, 50, even 60 live events for classrooms to join. And I do want to highlight we're doing an awesome virtual road trip coast to coast to coast in Canada, celebrating Canada's parks, national parks, historic sites, marine parks. We've got a great lineup of events. You can find that over on the website under our special events. I suggest you check those out. All right, I can see a big crew already tuning in via YouTube, comments coming in. Let us know where you're tuning in from. Of course, send us in some of your questions. We're looking forward to taking some of those. We've got a great event in store for you right now. Some of you may or may not know that there is a final frontier on Earth left to be explored. We've got better maps of the moon and Mars than we do of our ocean floor. So we are incredibly lucky to have Vicki Ferrini joining us today. She is a geophysicist. She's an explorer. She was recently named as one of the Explorers Club's 50 explorers to watch worldwide. And today she's going to tell us some tales of exploring the deep ocean, how we map the seafloor, and all the amazing discoveries that we are making. Pretty much anytime we drop something into the water with a camera on it, we find something pretty exciting. So I'm going to bring Vicki in live with us here. Hey, Vicki, how are we doing?
Great.
All right. Well, it's so good to have you joining us live today. Where are you joining us from today?
I'm in New York City.
New York City. Excellent. Well, Vicki, we've got a great crew of live classrooms who are going to be on camera and ask us some questions. We've got a crew of classrooms on YouTube who are going to send in some questions. It's going to be great. So I'm going to let you take over for a little bit, and then we'll hit those questions.
All right. Awesome. Thank you. All right. So as you just heard, we have better maps of other planets than we do of our own. And that's because the ocean covers more than 70% of our planet. And we can't see through the water. So since we can't see it, we can't image it easily. And we really don't know what it looks like in detail. So what we'd like to be able to do is look out from the ocean, from the beach, or from other parts of, from boats, and just actually drain the water and see what the seafloor looks like underneath. This is a couple pictures from the Bay of Fundy, where the tide range is just massive. So it's a rare place where we can actually see the seafloor revealed to us. But when we look at maps of the planet, you might think, well, it sounds crazy that the planet's not mapped. I can see the seafloor here. But what most people don't realize is that the shape of the seafloor is generally based on a prediction. It's modeled. And if we think about how little of the ocean has actually been mapped with direct measurement, if this map represents the whole planet, and this red box represents how much of the planet is ocean, only about 20% of the ocean has been mapped. So just that little blue box. So there's a huge portion of our planet that remains unmapped and unexplored. So how do we see through water? You might, go swimming and look a little bit with your eyes or through a mask, and you can see a short distance, but we really can't see very far because the light gets scattered. So in the old days, something called lead line was used. So basically a weight on a rope or a chain to measure distance below the ship. After that, sonar started to be used, and we could collect a sound measurement under the ship as the boat moved along, and we could get individual soundings, they were called, depth measurements. But now we use a technology called multibeam, which is basically a fan of sound beams that it's kind of like mowing the lawn. You get a swath of data as the boat goes back and forth, and we can see a bit more, maybe 4 times the water depth than we could with single beam sonar. So what do these systems look like? They're pretty big on big boats. You can see the picture on the bottom there. There's some people standing next to the sonar transducer. It's huge to be able to see through deep water. But we can put them on smaller boats to map shallow water, and we can put them on robots to map in the deep sea. The picture on the top left is what the software looks like when we're collecting it. And I'll show you an example of that in a video form in a minute. But just to give you a sense of the difference between satellite prediction and actually mapping with a ship with this kind of technology, the picture here on the left is what the shape of the seafloor looks like with satellite prediction. And if we look in at what it actually looks like in the same place, when we take a sonar, it actually brings the seafloor into focus. And we're not able to see anything at this resolution that's smaller than maybe a football field. So it's still pretty coarse resolution, but you can see a lot more details in this map than you could see from the satellite prediction, which is not very precise. Here's another example, satellite predicted and then brought into focus with multibeam sonar. So just to make sure you understand what you're looking at here, the colors aren't really candy, although they look like they might be delicious candy. The warmer, bluer, purple colors are deeper, and the cooler colors are deeper, and the warmer, redder colors are shallower. So it gives you a sense. It's how we generally try to visualize it to help us understand the depth. So here's another example. In this case, we have predicted bathymetry, where it looks kind of blurry, and then actual measured bathymetry, where it looks a little bit more focused. And if I play this little video, you'll see that as we bring actual sonar over this, we're able to identify this little mountain. It's over 1,500 meters taller than we thought the seafloor was based on prediction alone. So there's huge uncertainty with the predicted bathymetry, and really getting out to map it directly is what we need. So this is a video of what it looks like when we're collecting sonar. This is a profile, basically. And each time it refreshes is another ping of sound, so another blast of sound. And the sound goes down to the seafloor, and it comes back up. And this pink line here gives us an estimate of what the depth and the shape of the seafloor is in this location. Of course, since we're on a boat and the boat is moving in all sorts of directions, we have to monitor the motion of the ship so that we can correct those measurements and make sure that we don't have sort of artifacts in the data, and we can make a very clean, smooth picture of what the seafloor looks like. And when I say the ship moves, it can move a lot. Here's a picture from topside in some pretty rough seas. This is the little video I took on that same vessel, the RV Falcor, when I was down having a snack. And the water just, it's pretty wild out there. It's pretty disorienting. And we're really trying to constrain these, the equipment to make sure that we can monitor things well. Here's another one of my favorites. I put my can of ginger ale on the table, and it just slid right off onto the floor. That's how much the boat was moving. So when we correct for all those things, we can make these beautiful maps with lots of detail of what the shape of the seafloor looks like. We can understand large-scale geologic processes. We can understand the sort of regional situation so that we can put other assets down into the water. We can resolve all kinds of beautiful features that we just couldn't see without this kind of equipment. So ship-based mapping is really the beginning. Once we really want to start to see with our eyes, or on the scale that we think of with our eyes, we have to put robots into the water. And they might be human-occupied, they might be autonomous, they might be remote, so they're connected to the ship. So there's a bunch of different examples here. All of them have different capabilities, and it's all part of the big sort of deep sea exploration toolkit that we have. Once you get into the water and start to move below it, of course, becomes much more serene and quiet and calm. Here's a picture of Alvin being lowered just below the surface. And once we get to the bottom, we start to see with our eyes, either through cameras or through the porthole, the window here on Alvin. And we can start to see, it's almost like looking through a straw to see what's down there. We can see the seafloor, the geology. These are lava pillows that formed with some sediment on top of them. Here's a little hydrothermal vent that's spewing hot mineral-laden water out of the seafloor. There's incredible ecosystems down there. We're always discovering new things. And now when we take these systems down to the bottom, we can map in much higher resolution. So here's one of my favorite maps that I created about a decade ago. And I've looked at this lots of times and studied what the different features are. There's hydrothermal vents, there's cracks in the seafloor, there's those pillow-shaped things. But the sense of scale is really hard to get. It's written there on the bottom, 20 meters, but what does that really mean? We can look at some of the pictures there, but we can actually start to envision what this looks like with respect to people. So I did this little thing where I stacked people on top of each other to help me get a better understanding of how big this thing is. So it's really big, and it's a very interesting thing that we have to do to understand in our brains as we're looking at these sort of candy-colored maps of the seafloor. We can then overlay photo mosaics and really start to understand the detail as though we're standing on the seafloor looking at it ourselves. So this is one of my favorite examples. This is a picture that was rendered when I was in college. I worked with some scientists at Woods Hole, and at that time, the best way that we could make these renditions for the world to see what the seafloor looked like was for scientists to explain to people, to artists, what it looked like. You know, they'd have a few pictures, they could describe the experience of looking out the window and what they saw, and an artist would transform that into a picture like this. Fast forward with technology and time, and now we can create maps of this very same place with sonar data to incredible detail, less than a meter resolution. So you can start to see things like, you know, the size of a chair or a desk in this kind of resolution, and it starts to become more photorealistic. Speaking of photorealistic, we also can make these spectacular photo mosaics. I don't know if you can see the scale bar here, but this is across the top 16 meters. So this is a huge hydrothermal vent complex that we're starting to be able to, with more and more ease, create these kinds of renditions of what the seafloor looks like. Another really exciting thing that's been becoming more common is this idea of telepresence. So with remote operated vehicles, like the one shown on the top left here, typically when they're running, there's a control van or an operation sort of mission control space on top of the ship where the pilot sits and the navigators and the scientists, and that's the picture on the right side here. They're controlling this little robotic vehicle. And with telepresence, we can now stream all that information back to shore. And so the picture on the bottom here is from a place called the Inner Space Center at the University of Rhode Island, where there's a whole group of people participating in this via satellite connection, and they can be part of the expedition, part of the exploration in real time. So that's sort of a grand tour of what we're using for technology to explore the deep sea. I wanted to close with this picture just to give you a sense, again, of how little of the ocean is mapped. This is an international compilation of our best knowledge of what's been mapped on the seafloor. Everything that's black is where there's no data, and everything that's different shades of blue is where we have some data. So all that black area hasn't been mapped at all yet. And most of this area really hasn't been explored to the kind of detail that we can do with the submersibles and robots. So as we continue to map and explore, the really exciting question is, what will we discover? So, my last slide is just a closing thought about what, like, some of the excitement of exploration. Really, as we continue to explore, we gain this huge appreciation for nature and for humankind, and it's a very, very exciting place to be. So with that, I'll take questions.
All right. Great stuff, Vicki. Thanks for taking us on a little, showing us the ropes and what it takes to explore seafloor. And as we can see, it's not easy, but we are starting to get some beautiful images with the multi-beam. I was lucky enough to spend 2 weeks on board the Nautilus awesome. During one of the expeditions. So it was more of a biological one. We were looking at the Davidson seamount, but anytime that we didn't have the ROVs in the water, we were mapping the floor as we were going from place to place. So it was really cool to watch that happening in real time up on the screen. Okay, let's start meeting some of our groups. So those tuning in live via YouTube, send in some questions now. Keep it to questions. I don't want to have to mute anybody, but we want to make sure the questions are coming nicely to the top. But let's start visiting some of our live groups. Let's see. Mr. Shattuck's crew is joining us today. They are joining us from Chalk River in Ontario. Let me bring them into the call. I see someone waiting. What are you doing?
Hi. I wanted to know if equipment has ever broken while mapping the ocean floor.
That's a great question. And it happens all the time that equipment breaks. So one of the really exciting things about going to sea is not just the exploration and discovery, but the agility that you have to be able to respond to things breaking. So it could be the winch that lowers the vehicle over the side of the boat. I've been on a cruise where that has had a major failure, and the crew is very skilled to be able to fix things. Sometimes there can be engine trouble with the boats that has to be fixed. When you're at sea in the middle of the ocean, you're on your own, and everybody who's there has to do their job to make sure that things work and that everyone is safe and that things get done as good as possible. There's also been times where, you know, the sonar system might fail completely, or the vehicle might have a problem and just be out of the water while it gets repaired. So typically when you go to sea, kind of like when you go on a camping trip, you take the things that you expect to need. Sometimes in rare cases, you might not have the equipment or the pieces, the hardware pieces that you need to fix something. And so at times you'll have to come closer to port to do an airdrop kind of thing to get some equipment. But typically the ship and the science party is very well equipped with what they need should things break, so that they can address problems and get the data to the best of their ability.
All right, great question to get us started. Here's an interesting one from the YouTube chat. This is from Espiran's group, and they're wondering if animals, maybe pods of whales or something, can disrupt the sonar at all. Do they come up? Are they picked up?
So I have been working in shallow water at times where with a high frequency sonar system, which is more in the range of some of the, like dolphins, for example, the kinds of frequencies they sort of speak and listen at. And the dolphins have actually been drawn toward the sonar and come over and bumped up against it and kind of played with it. Typically, with deep water mapping, we're using relatively low frequency sound, and we're not resolving very small things in the water column. And the systems are also designed to really focus on the seafloor with a little bit of water column sensing. So it's not usually a problem. It doesn't obstruct the signal. The wildlife when you're out at sea, at the surface, when you're in the middle of the ocean, is another spectacular experience. There'll be dolphins, turtles sometimes float by. There's all kinds of really exciting stuff that surprises you when you can't see any land in sight and you really have no sense of where you are, and then suddenly something appears and there it is and it's beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely. That was one of my favorite memories on the ship was, you know, for hours you could be on the deck and it's just open ocean. And then all of a sudden, hundreds of dolphins are surrounding the ship, jumping and playing, and then gone almost as quickly. It was pretty wild, some of those moments. When
one of the most magical moments I've had was on my first deep water cruise. We were coming into port after about 20 days at sea, and it was night. We were heading into Costa Rica, and we could see the silhouette of land on the horizon. And there was a pod of dolphins that was escorting us. So they were riding right along the bow and the bow wave, and the water was bioluminescent. So they looked like these little glowing torpedoes. It was just beautiful.
Oh, wow. That sounds absolutely spectacular. Very, very cool. All right. Let's meet another classroom here. I am going to head over to fourth graders in Michigan, Crystal Falls, Miss DeCoster's group. Let me bring them in. There we go. How are we doing, Michigan?
Hi. So my question is, have you ever found like sunken ships?
That's a great question. And absolutely the answer is yes. So this is exactly the kind of technology that people use to look for sunken ships. Often they'll use sonar first to identify its location. And then depending on the water depth, they can either send divers down or they can send a remote operated vehicle down to start to explore it in detail. I've done a little bit of archaeology work. I did some work in Greece looking for ancient shipwrecks. We imaged some old like pottery basically that was on the seafloor that they used to transport wine in, I believe. And we imaged that both with sonar and with cameras and created a beautiful 3D photo mosaic of it. But there's all kinds of, artifacts from people in the ocean, lots of shipwrecks and all kinds of things to discover. It's not just natural wonders, it's also human wonders and history.
All right, I'm going to grab another question here from YouTube. Miss Percy's class is joining us, and they're wondering about the trips you take, the expeditions. How long are you usually away from home?
So the length of the trip varies. It depends in part on where you're going. Sometimes if you're traveling way out into the middle of, say, the Pacific Ocean, it takes you a very long time to get to the site. And then depending on what you're doing, you'll have several days on site. The longest trip that I've been on personally was 42 days at sea. I think most of the large vessels have an endurance of, I think 50 to 80 days, depending on how many, because they have to take food with you too, right? So to make sure you have enough food and enough fuel to get out to where you're going and come back. But some trips can be as short as a couple of weeks, and some can be as long as a couple of months.
All right, excellent. Keep those questions coming in via YouTube. We're going to jump to another one of our live classes this time. Where should we go now? Let's go. Miss McRae's class is joining us in London, Ontario, 5th graders. Let me pop them in. How are we doing today?
We're great. I have one really deep question for you. If this is just the beginning, what is in store for the future of mapping of the ocean floor if we keep this up?
That's a great question. So given lots of things that are happening, including technology advancing, more urgency to understand the planet as it's changing, and really the recognition of how little of the ocean has been mapped, there's a big international initiative that's been started just a couple of years ago called Seabed 2030. And I'm part of that project, and we're basically working with international partners around the world, from academia and government and industry and even private citizens, to try to get as much data as we can and complete the map of the seafloor. Just to have a first order map will be a huge accomplishment. And those maps become the foundation of all kinds of different things, right? It's the beginning of biological studies. It's the beginning of conservation kinds of work, all sorts of stuff. So having that first map is going to have a huge impact. There's also right now a UN decade of ocean science for sustainable development, and mapping and characterizing the seafloor is a big part of that. So I think, we already have a lot of momentum moving toward this goal of mapping the whole seafloor. Once it's fully mapped, there'll be more to do because the seafloor changes, and the planet's changing all the time. And so we'll have a base map, but we'll have to go and do more detailed work and resurvey parts of the ocean that are changing. And from there, who knows what we'll discover and what we'll accomplish.
All right, very cool. It is an exciting time. And, one thing I'm sure you've noticed a lot being on ships is that you don't necessarily have to be a scientist. There are tons of roles. From navigation to ROV pilots, which is almost like a video game when you watch them with their joysticks, engineers, crew on board who are taking care of food and other things like that. So there's a lot of jobs as well that you don't necessarily have to stick to straight science. You can still get out and be part of ocean exploration.
That's right.
Okay, let's take a little trip to Las Vegas. We're going to head to Las Vegas with Miss Lawrence and her students. Let me bring her in here. There we go. Hey, Miss Lawrence. Oh, can you grab the mute for me, Miss Lawrence? You're on mute right now.
All right. So my students have a question about human trash. Has the ocean floor been affected by human trash?
So human trash has definitely been found in the deepest depths of the ocean. I think there was a plastic bag that was documented in the Marianas Trench recently. But I think, plastic is certainly circulating the global ocean and breaking into smaller pieces, which is problematic. There'll be little pieces of larger trash that we'll see sometimes when we're diving with the ROV or the HOV, the human occupied vehicles. Typically, when you're at sea on a research vessel, we don't dispose of trash. We handle the trash in a conscious way so that we're not creating a mess. A lot of things will get incinerated on board. Organics will get thrown overboard on some ships. So we try to be as responsible as possible. But certainly the effects of what humans are doing on land can be felt in the ocean and in the deep sea. We tend to think of them as very separate, but everything is connected, and we have to be, I think it's responsible to be thinking globally as we sort of move together through the next years.
Oh, absolutely. No question. we were using ROVs to look at the ocean floor over 3 kilometers down, and it's this amazing landscape, and then a Dr. Pepper can comes into focus. It's just kind of the last thing you expected to see down there, but why not? Things come in from land. People are careless on boats as well. So I think many classrooms know that over 8 million tons of plastic alone each year is entering our ocean. So it's got to go somewhere when it enters the ocean. Okay, let's see. I'm going to grab another one from YouTube here. So we've got a few questions coming in here about your experiences. One is from Dominic, wondering how deep you've gone in the ocean. So maybe he's wondering if you've been in a submersible before. And then Charlie would like to know what it is about exploring that you like.
Okay, so first, I've been in Alvin twice. My first dive was to the East Pacific Rise. I actually saw tube worms. Those amazing creatures just through the porthole window that I was sitting behind. The maximum depth on that dive was 2,511 meters. These things get logged into your memory. The second dive that I did was not as deep, but was equally thrilling. I think for me, what's most exciting about exploration is just not knowing what we're going to find. And actually, I really, really enjoy the whole process of revealing the seafloor in detail. It's beautiful. The landforms underwater are just spectacular, from giant ripples that are 100 meters tall to meandering channels that extend for hundreds of kilometers. It's just beautiful. And we tend to think about, the ocean is just flat and blue, but there's all kinds of incredible processes happening on the seafloor and in the water column that we really don't have very much understanding of.
Absolutely. I hope all the students tuning in right now are feeling a little curious and are going to spend a little time researching not only the ocean, but careers, because there are going to be a lot of future careers exploring our ocean as we try and figure out what we don't know. And it's a lot. Very cool. Okay, we need to visit Miss S's grade 5 students in Manotick. Miss S, how are we doing?
Pretty good, thanks. I'm at home because my students are home. We're all sort of, our site got closed. So I'm going to ask questions on behalf of some of them. I think I am curious to know about how deep the Mariana Trench is. That's from Gabe.
So it is 11,034 meters deep.
Wow.
To our best understanding.
Can you make a comparison to something so we understand the proportion?
I don't know if I can do that well. I can't. I actually struggle with this off the top of my head.
I'm going to share something in the chat really quickly because I came across something the other day that is just a really great story map on the Challenger Deep. So I'm going to share this link in the chat bar because I think classrooms will have a lot of fun checking it out. And then as you work your way through the story map, it makes some really good comparisons. It compares it to if you were, well, actually where you are in New York, if you were walking down through Manhattan, it shows what that would be. So it would be like taking a stroll through Midtown, and you can follow that route exactly. So do take a look at this. And then they have a little bit of a stack here. Let me see if I can find, here we go.
I have another question while you're looking, and it's interesting. We were curious, a few of us were curious about whether or not animals like dolphins are ever used to do some of this underwater mapping stuff.
I don't think they are in the academic realm, but I think that they might be occasionally in other sectors, like perhaps military.
Okay,
I have some memory of reading something about that at one point.
Okay, thank you. It's a line of inquiry we'll follow for sure.
That's an awesome question. It makes me think of The Life Aquatic. I don't know if you've seen that movie, Vicki. Yeah. Definitely makes me think of that. And I did share in the chat the link to that story map. And I did find that statistic that I was looking for from that story map. The tallest building in the world is the Burj Khalifa in Dubai, and it says it would be over 13 of those to stretch from the top to the bottom, which is pretty crazy. And you need 6 Grand Canyons as well to stretch from the top to the bottom. Those are some of the statistics, some of the comparisons that they made.
It's really hard to grasp the scale of what we're talking about. It really is. It's very difficult to think about the depth and also just the magnitude of the ocean. It's huge. You think about how much of the planet it covers.
All right. Well, we've got time, Vicki. I'm going to swing through a few more of our camera classrooms. Mr. Shattuck, do you have another question?
My question is like, what's your favorite site you've seen while you were on a boat?
My favorite site that I've seen? I think, well, you know, sunrises and sunsets at sea are pretty amazing and spectacular. In terms of scientifically, the most exciting thing that I've done at sea was sort of a surprise. It wasn't planned. We were in the South Pacific doing some work at hydrothermal vents, and we had some bad weather, and we weren't able to do what we had intended to do with the remote operated vehicle. And we were nearby a new island that had formed. And so we were able to get everyone on board to agree that this would be an okay use of time. And we went over and we mapped around this big volcano that has little pieces of it that stick up above the waterline. And there were 2 islands that were there before, and there was a big volcanic eruption, and a whole new island formed in between the 2, and it connected them and created basically one big island. And we were able to map with the ship. We started around the outside of the volcano where it was plenty deep, and we used the multibeam sonar to see how shallow it was to the side of us. And with every concentric pass with the ship, we got a little bit closer and closer. And we were actually able to get inside of the middle of the volcano, inside the caldera, and we could map inside there as well. And it was really, really exciting to map not only something that hasn't been mapped before, but to map something that has just been formed and is brand new. And that data was used in some studies that NASA was conducting, looking at Martian landscapes to understand how the landscapes evolved based on how we can see evolution of landscapes here on Earth. So it was a really exciting opportunity that was not intended, and it was a just really great lucky chance that we were nearby and had the right equipment and the time to go do that.
Well, I would say that's a pretty darn exciting experience to get to see and map, that new land being formed. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Right place, right time, definitely. Let's see. Let's swing back to Michigan. See if they have another question for us in Michigan. Here comes someone.
Have you ever found any new species in the ocean? And what is the most recent one?
So I myself have never found a new species, but my colleagues certainly have, who study biology. I'm sure I've been on trips where new species have been discovered on those by my colleagues. I'm not sure what the most recent one is, but there's a lot of information that gets put online from different groups like the Ocean Exploration Trust and the NOAA Office of Ocean Exploration and Research, really promoting when these things happen. It happens all the time that new macro species that you can see with your eye are discovered, and also microorganisms that you can't see with your eye are discovered all the time as well. So keep an eye out and you'll see lots of stuff coming out all the time. There's new discoveries with almost every trip.
Okay, we've got Joe Gamer online. I think he's from Miss Cini's class. And he's wondering how much the mapping is changing year by year. How much do you think we're filling in an average year?
So this is a little bit complicated because we are currently still trying to gain access to all data that exists, because there's definitely more out there that has not yet been shared. So we're working to sort of close that gap and figure out how all the people who have that data would be willing to share it. In terms of new data acquisition, it kind of depends on the water depth and the ship's capabilities. Like I said before, we're typically getting about 4 times the water depth when we're using a sonar. So if you're at the ship at the surface of the water and it's 2 kilometers deep, you're going to get 8 kilometers across the swath. If you take the sonar closer to the seafloor, it's still 4 times. Now it's the altitude. So if you're 20 meters off the seafloor, maybe you'll get 80 meters, maybe a little less. A computation was done a couple years ago to figure out how long it would take if one ship were to map the entire rest of the ocean. At that point, it was, I think, 15% we had estimated was mapped. And the answer was that it would take one ship at the surface about 1,000 years to map the whole rest of the ocean. Most of that time would be spent in shallow water, because just like when you think about the swath width of the sonar, it's just like a flashlight, right? If you're close to a wall with a flashlight, you have a small cone of light. It's very distinct. And as you pull back away from the wall, it gets bigger. It's the same thing with sound signals. So in shallow water, you get a smaller, more focused sound beam. You have a narrower footprint, and you're going to get less coverage with each pass. And in deeper water, you get more coverage, but you actually get less resolution. So hopefully we'll get there, in 10, 20 years. New technology coming online, including autonomous platforms, is going to help accelerate things for sure.
Yeah, well, I think first of all, it's great news. It's not just one ship, because
Yeah.
1,000 years is a long time. And yeah, I mean, great analogy with the flashlight. When you're shallow, the beam comes back quicker. You get a smaller look. Nice and deep, you get that wider path. Really good analogy. Madame McRae's class. You guys have another question for us?
We do, and it's an argument my kids seem to be having about the midnight zone and the night zone. Is there a difference between the two? And then they also want to know if you've been to either.
I'm not sure that I'm qualified to answer that question, because I'm not that well versed on those terms. I've probably transcended through those zones during my dives as I've gone to the bottom of the ocean, but I'm not sure what the exact definitions of them are. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I mean, that's the beauty of being on a ship where there's a whole team of different scientists who their specialty is different things, right? Not
right.
Everybody can be up to speed on everything, and that's what makes a really good team. So there we go. There's a little bit of research for the classrooms, is to see, is there I've definitely heard of the things like the mesopelagic, where you're starting to lose the light, kind of like that twilight zone. But when you get to that dark place, is there a difference between the midnight and the night? I'm thinking that once you hit the certain darkness where you lose the light, it's probably just the dark zone or the midnight zone or something. So there we go. A little homework for our classrooms to do a little bit of research after today's event. Las Vegas. Miss Lawrence, do you have another question for us? Don't forget to grab your mute for us.
I could ask my students if they have a question. Does anybody have a question? They are on distance learning.
Yep.
So does anybody have a question about the ocean? Okay, Noah, go ahead.
Is there any new species in the bottom of the ocean that you're coming up under?
Is there any what now? Say that again.
Is there any new species that you're coming upon?
Are there any new species? Yeah, they were just saying about new species being discovered all the time. Yes, absolutely, new species. Yeah,
And a lot of them look like aliens. It's amazing. Not just because they're so foreign to us, but because they're just so, not just because they're new, but they're just that different.
And Addison, do you have a question?
What do they mostly find at the bottom of the ocean?
What do they mostly find?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, much of the bottom of the ocean is sediment covered or lava covered, hardened lava. My experience of diving in Alvin and looking out the window at this incredible volcanic landscape, I definitely had a different view of it when I looked out the window of Alvin than I had from looking at maps of what the shape of it was, or even at pictures. So The most similar experience I've ever had on land was actually when I was in Hawaii because of the volcanic landforms there. It looks very similar. It's kind of like you're driving, along the seafloor when you're driving across parts of Hawaii. But then there's, all kinds of critters all over the place too.
Yeah, and I think, just touching on that species question, that I think a lot of students might think it's as easy as, ooh, that's new. I've never seen that before. But actually, it's a multi-year process in a lot of cases to, put your results out there. Other scientists and researchers take a look at it to see. And so it can take a year or even longer to have a new species identified. So it's not just to point at the ROV screen and say, there's a new species. It takes a little bit of time. Okay. Miss S's grade 5s, do you have one more question for us?
All right. How much we'd like to know, hang on just a second. We'd like to know a little bit, what do you know about the Bermuda Triangle?
I don't know too much about the Bermuda Triangle, but I have been on a ship in and out of Bermuda, and we took Alvin there and one of the autonomous vehicles there to do some testing. The ocean depth drops off very quickly near Bermuda, so it's a great place to go and test equipment because you can get from port to very deep water very quickly. In terms of, why there's all these stories of platforms being lost in that area, it's definitely not my expertise. But we're certainly mapping the seafloor around there relatively quickly as different groups are coming together to map the North Atlantic. So perhaps that will shed some insight or dispel some myths as we gain more knowledge and data.
All right, very cool. Well, classrooms, do you want to dive a bit deeper? I know you mentioned Alvin a few times. We've worked with Hui, the Woods Hole Oceanography Institute, for a few events. We've done events live with Alvin as they were launching Alvin for dives, and we've talked to different scientists. So if you head onto our YouTube channel, you can find some of those. If you search up WHOI Hui or look up Alvin, you can find some of those videos. So I want to start off with a huge shout out to our YouTube crew. So many questions, we couldn't get to them all. Thank you for joining us today and sending in those great questions. Big shout out to our camera classrooms. Thank you for all of your great questions today. Always great to see classrooms when we can, or educators representing their classrooms, as we are very much in a distance learning zone in a lot of North America. Vicki, thank you so much for joining us. Congrats on the EC50. Great accomplishment. And the work you're doing is so amazing. Seabed 2030 is an amazing project. Yeah, we're looking forward to future connections as we start to piece together more of the mystery of our ocean floor.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Have yourselves a great weekend. And we look forward to seeing your classrooms again. Thanks, everyone.